So a couple of months ago, my cousin found a good deal on a BMW and he decided to buy it without taking it to a shop first. Also a couple of months ago, he started having his first problems with his BMW. If you didn't figure out the timeline yet, he bought it, car already had problems, but they were masked, and then they started happening, and now the car's overheating, the wheel feels like it's about to fall off, just a bunch of stuff is going on, and we're gonna check it out today. So behind me is an E90 328i, it's a 2007, so before the facelift, and it's got right around 170,000 miles. So it's actually, he drove it here a couple of hours, even with all of those issues. So it's still running and driving, but as I was bringing it into the shop, there's a lot of stuff I already noticed right off the bat. And I'm gonna show you guys all of those things and also talk about some of the common problems on this car. So we're gonna start out on the outside. My cousin really doesn't care about the cosmetics of this car at all. All he's worried about, he wants a daily drivable car, especially now that he's gonna have a baby on the way. So we're gonna start out by checking out the mechanicals first. Ooh. We'll get to that. Even though I said we're not gonna talk about cosmetics, I can already tell the hood has been repainted, fenders, bumpers, even the roof looks like it's been repainted. I'm not sure what the story is behind that, but it is a 2007, so chances are just clear coat peel and stuff like that, and that's why they repainted it. However, this car is a clean title, and as I'm looking at all of these stickers, they are the original stickers of the car, and there should be a VIN stamp somewhere on here. We'll check all that. So chances are I'm correct with the whole theory about just clear coat peel, and that's why they repainted it. Now, as you can see with all the leaves, it is fall time, which is why there's a bunch of leaves all over this car, but the engine itself doesn't look too bad. This is an N52, and it's got right around 230 horsepower, probably not that much anymore, but still there. Now, there's a couple of things I'm already noticing off the bat. It is not really caked up in oil, so that's not too bad. That's actually a good sign. Another good sign is someone has upgraded this hose. This hose is known to break. There's a plastic fitting right here, and someone's upgraded it with the aluminum one, and then they put this ugly looking hose clamp on here. We'll get to that, we'll fix it. It's not a big deal. But another thing I did notice that does not look good is all of the RTV along this valve cover. So I don't have anything against RTV. RTV has its place, but there's valve cover gaskets on here, so you don't have to use RTV at all. You can use RTV in certain spots on certain models. This car doesn't require it at all. And the worst thing is the RTV is on the outside of the gasket surface, so it's not even doing anything. It just looks like a mess. And if it looks like that on the outside, I'm sure it's a mess on the inside with RTV as well. But it's not leaking, so we're probably not gonna touch it. But let's keep moving on and see if there's anything else I notice. Now, on the power steering systems on the E90s and this era of car, they actually use CHF11S fluid, which is like a hydraulic fluid. And that just is very sticky. If it gets on the outside, it just attracts a bunch of dust and dirt and debris. It just makes a whole gooey mess. Now, this power steering reservoir has a vent hole in it, and that's why there is a little bit of seepage coming out of the whole reservoir, and all this is caked up and very sticky. But I don't really see any major leaks. A couple of things I do notice is the hoses and all that are original. Almost everything on this car seems original as far as the intake boot, but that's not really a huge concern on these N52s or E90s. The naturally aspirated intake boots do not just wear and tear like they did on the previous generations. So I'm sure if I do mess with it though, chances are something's gonna break, but as of right now, it looks okay. Now, another major issue on these cars is the oil filter housing gasket. Now, when that gasket starts leaking, it goes everywhere. It coats all of the hoses, it coats the belt, and it even causes the belt to sometimes just break because of all that oil just saturating the belt, and it just slips off, or it'll shred and then get sucked up into the engine. In this case, the oil filter housing gasket seems to have been replaced. I mean, it's got 170,000 miles. These usually go out every 60K, but this one looks pretty good. And I don't really see any RTV seeping out the sides, so that's a good sign, because whenever you're doing these oil filter housing gaskets, you do not want to use any RTV, because if that RTV gets into any of those passages, it's going to be a bad day. Now, another common area on all these E90s is this cabin filter housing assembly. All these tabs, they always break, or these holes just get stripped out and the screws don't sit in it. As you can see, there's no screws right here. They've got one right here, missing over there, missing over there. I'm sure there's one on that corner as well. So there's literally only 2 screws holding this in. It's not a big deal, it's just a cap and filter assembly. But we are missing some covers. We're missing the brake reservoir cover, and we're also missing the DME box cover, which is not a big deal as long as you're not pressure washing the engine bay, which obviously this doesn't seem like it's been washed in a long time. So it's not that big of a concern for us. But as you can see right here, this is a disaster waiting to happen. This is the hood latch cable, and as you can see, all of the plastic protectant is coming off. It's not even secured onto here because both of the push pins that secure it are broken off. Now eventually, this hood latch cable is gonna break, and then you're not gonna be able to open the hood, or there's just gonna be so much play that develops in here, you won't be able to unlatch it because this is not secured either. Now this hood latch cable is not too difficult to replace, and it just joins right here, so you don't have to really fish out a lot of stuff, but it is a pain in the butt to get it out of the cabin. So if you have a hood latch cable that's looking like this, make sure you go ahead and replace it before you can't open your hood. And if you can't open your hood, there are a few tips and tricks. Sometimes it does involve breaking stuff, but let's just put it this way. If you wait for the hood latch cable to break to replace it, you're gonna spend the same amount of time to get that hood open as you would to just replace it right now. Now, for those that are not too familiar with the E90, E92s, a quick way to tell about an LCI, which is a facelift, is by looking at these headlights. As you can see, these headlights have the amber reflector right here, and that's the easiest telltale sign of if it's a facelift or not. The facelift versions have a clear reflector, and most of them are LED. Now, another thing I can tell already is this windshield has been replaced. And whoever replaced it, they just put some kind of aftermarket gasket on the side, and as you guys saw earlier, when I opened this door, it smells really bad in there. And I'm pretty sure there's water getting into the cabin, and there's probably a good amount of mold in there. We're gonna diagnose that here shortly. Before we do that, let's go ahead and lift it up and take a look at the rest of the mechanical. By judging by missing those covers, I'm pretty sure the covers on the bottom are probably missing too, which is a good thing for us. That saves me some time. No surprise there, the covers are missing, and not just that, some of these are broken. I'm sure this rattles like crazy when you're on the freeway. You can see this one's also broken, and this car's not even low. I understand if it was a low car, these covers usually take a pretty bad beating. But all of this, I'm sure, is super annoying on the freeway. We might as well just take them off, honestly, at this point, but we'll see. And something literally just dripped. That's how you know it's a BMW. So let's just start here in the front and work our way back. So as I mentioned before, when I was driving this, the short distance I drove into the shop, literally the wheel felt like it was gonna fall off. It was just making all kinds of noise. Every time you pressed the brake, it made a huge thud and clunks and all kinds of stuff. Usually that points to control arms. And that is the case here. So it seems like these control arms have been replaced before, but they seem like they're just some cheapo aftermarket. They're not Lemforder or TRC, none of those. They're some cheap ones. This control arm is actually fine. I believe they call this the thrust arm. And yep, that is completely shot. Look at this. Oh, that is crazy. Like, I'm not even putting any kind of pressure. That is very, very dangerous. It's like no pressure. I could probably do it with my hand.
Yep.
Wow. And it's grooved up all the inside of this subframe as well, which is not a huge deal. I mean, if it came all the way through, then it would be a problem. But in this way, we can still replace that control arm. So all this suspension definitely needs to be replaced. The struts and shocks are also stock, 170,000 miles. I mean, struts and shocks should be replaced every 60 to 80,000 miles. 170 now, I mean, that's almost triple its lifetime. That's bad. Now, underneath here, it looks like a BMW. It's caked up with some oil. It's keeping everything lubricated, keeping it from rusting, which is always a good thing. I wonder if this control arm is also bad. So this one's not too bad. I mean, you can still see it's got play. So I mean, it's getting there, but it's not completely torn up like that other one. All of the tie rod boots are also torn. So there's a ball joint in here. You can't really see the tear, it's more on the inside, which the tie rods might be okay, but it's just gonna be a matter of time before they actually get dirt into those ball joints and wear it completely out. So all of the hoses and all of that looks stock. The water pump seems like it's been replaced before. But my cousin did tell me that there was an overheating fault, and when he had it checked out at like a different shop, they said that the water pump needs to be replaced. But he still drove it all the way here, which was like 3.5, 4 hours, and he didn't have any problems. So we're gonna replace that water pump and thermostat and all those hoses at the same time. But another area of concern is the oil pan gasket. Now on these E90s, the N52s, the oil pan gasket, when it leaks, it goes all the way back. And another issue with that is this has an aluminum magnesium block. So what they do is they actually use aluminum fasteners throughout a lot of this engine assembly. And when those aluminum fasteners, they're usually one-time use, and a lot of people don't know that, or a lot of people break them when they're tightening them when you don't torque them right. And that's the case on this one. So someone's replaced some of these bolts with some aftermarket hex bolts, just normal bolts. I mean, it's not going to be a huge deal. We'll be able to pull it off as long as it's not cross-threaded, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now, everything else underneath, it just caked up with some oil and dirt. Everything else looks fine. But another issue that I've addressed quite a few times on the E90 and E60 era of cars is the transmission. So most of those chassis came with ZF 6-speed transmissions. On the 328s, BMW decided to use a GM 6L45, which actually has held up pretty good. You don't really hear too many 328s with transmission issues as much as you would with the 335s or even the 330s with the ZF. So let's take a look at this. So you can see there's a bunch of residue around this transmission pan as well, and that's mostly actually from the oil pan gasket leaking and just throwing it back this way. But it does seem like someone has replaced this oil filter at least, and obviously the fluid when they did the filter, because yet again we have RTV around the edges, which this gasket does not require RTV either. Not sure why they put it there, but whenever we do this fluid and filter change, yeah, that's not going to be a fun job because I'm going to spend a lot more time just cleaning off that RTV. Ooh, that's not a good sign. So I'm looking at the AC drains. On the E90s, the AC drain is right around the transmission side, and I see blue fluid coming out of the AC drain. So whenever you see blue fluid on BMWs, it's usually coolant. And you should not be seeing any coolant coming out of your AC drain. Usually that points to a bigger problem with either like a cracked heater core or something along the lines that require removing the dash. And that is not a fun task at all. So honestly, I would say I hope it's not that, but there's really nothing else that could cause blue coolant to come out of the AC drain. And to diagnose that, you gotta take everything apart. So this is already turning into one of those videos why I don't like the E90s. A lot of my E46 guys probably know this. I've mentioned it quite a few times before. E90 just doesn't do it for me. I don't really like the styling too much, and all these leaks and all. I mean, it's a BMW. I guess they all leak, but I guess I'm biased against the E90. Let's just keep going. If it was a 335, that's okay. I mean, it's twin turbos. Can't go wrong with twin turbos. Everything else looks stock. Now, by judging by some of the modifications on this car, my cousin didn't do any of them. So all those M stripes and, you know, all of those vinyls, I would have thought at least there would be some kind of exhaust system on here, at the least a muffler delete. But I am pleased to say that it is all stock. Now, like I said before, my cousin is not going for any kind of cosmetic thing with this. If he was, my first recommendation will be to get rid of that fender gap and replace all the suspension with some coilovers and all that. But I think we're just gonna rock it out with all of this stock struts and shocks, because I'd rather have him spend the money to do all the other mechanical stuff to make the car reliable instead of trying to make it handle or look good. Obviously, we're gonna replace the suspension components that are completely busted, but everything back here, it actually wears out pretty well. I mean, a lot of these control arms and stuff, they don't usually go bad that often. Even though this car has 170,000 miles, a lot of this stuff does not look too bad. So there is some residue on this differential. Now that could be from that oil pan gasket just pushing all that back, or it could be that the rear cover on this diff is leaking. The axle seals look fine on both sides. Same thing with the input shaft seal, that looks fine. So chances are it's just this rear diff cover. With this car having 170,000 miles, chances are this diff fluid has never been changed. And in order to replace that diff cover gasket, it does take some time, and it does require the removal of a lot of components. cost money. Time costs money, right? So in this case, you know, I would just recommend my cousin just do a differential fluid change. It's not really dripping out, it's just seeping around the edges a little bit. It's not that big of a deal. I wouldn't want him to waste his money on that. I'd rather have him just change the diff fluid every 30, 40,000 miles. Now, if we were gonna drop this differential for any kind of bushings and stuff, at that point, obviously it would be a no-brainer to replace that gasket. Quick and easy way to tell if your suspension is really in need of urgent work is obviously if it's clunking, you need to replace stuff. If there's uneven tire wear, or if there's just tire wear in general that you're not expecting, like this car, it does have camber wear on this side of the car, this side not so much. So the chances are that there is some suspension components that are either worn on here or it just has a bad alignment. So one thing you can do is just go to an alignment shop and see if the car is holding in alignment, and that will definitely help you out in figuring out what needs to be replaced first. Even though this car has over 170,000 miles, the suspension in the back is actually not that bad. Obviously there's going to be some wear and tear, but for the most part, E90s that are kept stock, their rear suspension wears pretty well. Unlike the previous generations with, you know, really wearing subframe bushings, trailing arm bushings, all of that, the E90 is actually not that bad. So there are quite a few arms that do have bushings in them. There's also a few ball joints. So the lower ball joint on this car is actually fine. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not really too much play. And then there's also a bushing that's built into the subframe right here. Now obviously you can see there is some bushing movement in here, but it's not to the point where like that front thrust arm bushing where it's just flopping around everywhere. I mean, obviously if he was gonna do some kind of performance driving, if he was gonna even lower the car with coilovers and stuff like that, I would definitely recommend he do a full overhaul on this rear suspension. That way the alignment will be good, he's not gonna be eating through tires that fast, and obviously usually whenever you do those kind of modifications, you are gonna do more spirited driving. He's not gonna be doing any of that, so it's not that big of a deal. And there's other mechanical work that needs to be prioritized before handling any of this. Now, one thing I am going to suggest to him is to just replace the shocks and the front struts at the very least, just so he can improve the ride quality quite a bit, and it will also help those tires last a little bit longer. Another area of concern would be these diff bushings. So whenever there's a diff bushing that goes out, you just have a lot of movement in the diff. You usually hear it between gear changes or even just shifting from park to drive or to reverse. You'll hear that diff moving around a lot. It's not that big of a concern on stock E90s and that era of cars, just because these bushings actually do last a long time. Now there is only 3 bushings. There's one up in the back, that's the big one. There's 2 in the front. Now that we've got a good look underneath the car, we've got a pretty good idea of what needs to be addressed and what needs to be prioritized, especially those front control arms. I definitely don't want my cousin driving around on a wheel that's about to fall off the car. So let's bring the car back down and let's see what all that smell is about. Might have to hold my breath for this one. There's mold everywhere.
Oh wow, I smell that.
That is so bad. I should have figured when I saw all those air fresheners, all those little trees hanging. So that means he must know, my cousin must know that it stinks in here in order to put all his air fresheners. I'm surprised he hasn't checked it out already. Wow. I mean, I knew it smelled bad in here, but after seeing that, just somehow, I think it smells even worse now. But that, we're definitely have to address that. I'm not even sure what we're gonna do to that yet. But while we're here, let me go and tell you guys what can cause water to leak like that. So on any car for that matter, there's usually a vapor barrier between the door and the door panel on the inside. Now that vapor barrier, as it says, it's a vapor barrier. It's supposed to keep all of the water and all that stuff out from inside the car. Now that vapor barrier on BMWs is made of this foam-like material. So just like most E-chassis BMWs, the E90 also has window regulator problems. So what I'm thinking is someone's replaced some of these window regulators. They either didn't put that vapor barrier back at all, or they just tore it when they were putting it back and water's coming through. Another area of concern could also be the sunroof drains. So the sunroof, there's drains on each corner, and that's just for any water that does get through that seal, it can drain out of the car instead of going right into the headliner. Now if any of those drains are disconnected or clogged or anything like that, water can make its way into the passenger floorboards. And another issue would also be the windshield or even the rear window glass itself. If it's ever been replaced, they didn't seal it properly, water can get past the seal and just get right into the carpet. Also, another area of concern is the door seals. Now this is a 2007 and most E90s are actually not going to have problems with their door seals just yet, just because they're not that old. But there's always a chance that a door seal might get damaged while doing something, any kind of repair work or just pulling stuff in and out. For example, this one right here is pretty busted, all torn up, but that is actually not going to cause a water leak in this area right here, because there's a seal on this as well. Now, if both of them were damaged, then yes, there's obviously a chance of that. And it has been raining here like a lot the last couple of days, so all this stuff is actually, I mean, none of this stuff is wet. It seems like it's just on the ground itself. Let's check out the other sides of the car, see if there's mold there as well. So there's definitely some mold back here as well. And guess what? He's accustomed to the BMW life already. He's got a jug of coolant in here. Yep, more mold. And guess what? Some more mold. All the boxes are checked on this one. There's also some more racing stripes. Now, one of my biggest pet peeves on the E90 are the cup holders. I hate the cup holder design, and they always break. Let's see if these work. Okay, one works. That one shoots out like a rocket. And just like all other E90s, it is gummy, gummy, gummy in this door panel. Like, look at this. It's so sticky. And it's leaving marks all over my hands. But I mean, the paint itself, I mean, it looks pretty shiny. I mean, it's gonna be fine. My cousin doesn't wash the car, so it's not gonna be a big deal. And I mean, oh, look at that. Would you look at that? There's a whole chunk of the sunroof gasket missing. That is, and this whole sunroof is moving a lot too. Yeah, so that's really bad. If you guys have any tips on how to deal with mold like that, I've never had that kind of mold. I've dealt with, like, you know, little mildewy stuff a little bit here and there, but this is like on all of the carpets, it's everywhere. And I think I'm gonna have to wear a respirator, and we're gonna have to keep all the windows closed while it's in here, because that's bad. So I went ahead and looked at all of the brakes as well. Seems like the pads are brand new, but all of the rotors are really grooved up. So chances are the guy that my cousin bought the car from, he was a used car dealer, and he probably just replaced the pads, did that valve cover gasket hack job. So for the most part, I mean, the car is not bad for 174,000 miles. Now mechanically, I'm not too worried about this car. A lot of the questionable repairs and stuff, we can definitely figure that out. It's not a big deal. But cosmetically as well, it's got a lot of issues, but we're not worried about any of that. We just want it to be a good, running, drivable car. But the thing that does worry me the most is all of that mold. That's definitely not safe. I don't know how long it's been like that, but by the look of it, it seems like it's accumulated over time, and those little trees are not helping. I don't know what my cousin was thinking. And I'm just happy it's not black ice. You know, when you see those cars with black ice, like 20 black ices in there, it smells like cologne just straight up. Somebody just went to town with it. At least it doesn't smell like that in there. But that mold we are gonna have to address. I'm not sure how I'm gonna do that yet. If you guys have any tips or advice for that, please leave that down below. I would definitely be open to trying some stuff. We're gonna buy some respirators and deal with that outside. But besides that, I think we're just gonna figure out what we're gonna do mechanically. I'm gonna talk to my cousin and go from there. I hope you guys did find some kind of useful info in this. If you guys have any requests for any kind of videos of any of the repairs I'm gonna do on here, make sure to leave them down below. I'll try to make as many videos as I can, whether it's short form content or full DIYs if possible. I'll also link the playlist down below of the E90 videos I've already filmed. We've got quite a few DIYs already, as well as a whole common problems video that goes more in depth with all the issues that these cars usually face. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in our next video.